Hi guys, we've got another exciting number-based video for our Eastmont Honors curriculum. And today we're specifically talking about Roman numerals. So it says, I can learn how the Romans used Roman numerals. Super easy. It's going to be exciting. So let's check it out. The first thing that I notice is that the Romans are using letters for their number system. So we don't see any 1, 2, 3. Instead, we see M, D, C. It looks like we have an L, X, a V, and an I in there. So let's kind of look at what these letters mean. Let's look at a diagram that has what they used, for example, this I, and what we use, this 1. And I want you to pause the video in just a second, and I want you to think about the patterns. I want you to be a detective. What patterns do you see? What conclusions can you come to based on what they used, which is on this top part, and what we use on the bottom part? And I definitely want you to look at the bottom rows as well and see if that conclusion that you come to is true for other numbers as well. So pause the video, find patterns. Go! All right, so let's go ahead and look at some patterns that the Roman numerals have. The first thing that I see is we have 1, 2, and 3, and that kind of makes sense because one I is represented by 1, and if we have 2 I's, it's represented by 2, and if we have 3 I's, it's represented by 3. Super, super easy. But then wait a second, we get to this 4. Notice that the Romans did not use 4 I's to represent this 4 value. So that's kind of something that I notice as well. So, some inconsistencies in the pattern. Or wait a second, maybe that's a new pattern that's forming. So I notice that the I is above or before the V here for 4, and then the I is below the V on 6. So, maybe there's a new pattern forming. I'm just going to keep that in the back of my head as we continue our video and just see if this surfaces later on. Another thing that I notice is that the numbers are continuing upon one another. So what I mean here is I have my V, which is represented by 5, and then I have 1. Well, that makes sense. If I have 5 and then I add 1 I'm going to get a value of 6. If I add 1 more I, so now I have a total of 2 I's, I'm going to get 7. And that makes sense because 5 plus 2 is represented by 7. And here we have a 5 plus 2, here's a 7. And that's true for 8. If we use X for our 10, that's true for our 13. Here we have our 10, here's our 3. If we add that together, we get our 13. I'm going to go back to that pattern that we said, well, there's something going on with this V. Sometimes the I is in front and we get 4. Sometimes the I is in the back and we get 6. I'm going to use that same pattern and check out the 9 and check out the 11. And let's see if something's going on. So here I have my X, which is represented by 10. So if the I is before the 10, it's a 9. But if the I is after the X, which is 10, I'm going to get 11. So I notice again that if it's after, it's bigger than the value. But if it's before, if it's before, then it's going to be smaller. That might be a rule. Let's go to the next page and investigate some more. This slide shows us all the symbols the Romans used to create the Roman numerals. So notice we can create any number just from these 7 symbols alone. Let's investigate further. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, when would I see the 7 symbols the Romans used today? Some examples include the Super Bowl, king's names, lists or notes, fancy watches, chapter headings, or film sequels. These are all examples of when we would see Roman numerals today. All right, guys, we're going to backtrack just a little bit. We used this chart just a moment ago to kind of come up with some patterns. Well, now we're going to reveal the final true patterns or rules that the Romans used to follow their Roman numeral system. So let's look at the first one. It says you can't put a symbol together more than 3 times. All right, guys, make sure you're writing that 3 down on your notes. So, for example, 4 C's in a row isn't allowed. And we kind of talked about this a moment ago when we were looking at 4. We noticed that the Romans did not include 4 I's. In fact, I'm going to cross that off in red as a reminder that's no good. So therefore, we must have another rule in order to indicate how do we write 4. Let's go to the next slide. So it looks like rule number 2 is going to help us follow rule number 1 by giving strategies to write numbers where we feel tempted to write the letter more than 3 times in a row. So let's look at it. It says an I, X, or C before means minus that number. So when we're looking at the number 4, here we have 5, here we have 1, and when the number comes before, we need to minus. And that makes sense because if we take our 5, we minus our 1, we're going to get our 4. Let's look at the number 90. Well, 90, since we have an X before, that means we're going to minus, and we know that X means 10 and C means 100. So basically, we're going 100 minus 10, and we'll get our value of 90 because this X is in front. Another way to word this is anytime a smaller number is before a larger number, that's kind of a red flag. That means subtract, because most of the time the numbers are listed from greatest to least, or biggest to smallest. Well, this right here, you're like, whoa, wait a second. 10 is smaller than 100. That's another indicator that we need to minus in order to get the true number the Romans are talking about. The rule is you can only subtract one number, and you can only use I, X, and C. So keep these rules in mind as well when we're subtracting. Only subtract one number, and it must be I, X, or C. Rule number 3 states an I, X, or C after means add that number. So you might say that rule number 2 and rule number 3 are opposite, just depending on the position of those 3 letters. So if it's after, we're going to add. Let's look at 6. We've kind of talked about this before. When we have 5 and the I is after, that means 5 plus 6. Previously, we looked at 90. Let's see what it means when the X is after. So here we have 100, the X is after, we know that means 10, so we are going 100 plus 10 to get 110. Again, they're kind of like opposites. Lastly, when we look at a Roman numeral, we can kind of add from left to right, so from greatest to least. Let's look at this example right here. So when I'm looking at the number XVI, I'm thinking about what does X represent? 10, good job. And our V represents 5, and our I represents 1. So when we put it all together, I want you to think about what's the total? 16. Brilliant. Now remember, rule number 2. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes the smaller number is before a bigger number. This tells us that we need to group these together. So we have 10 plus 4 in this case, which is going to be 14. So but remember, rule number 2. All right, guys, we're almost done with our video. We're going to do 4 practice problems. Here we go. So it says, let's practice. We need to convert our numbers on this side into either Roman numerals or numbers. So let's go ahead and see. So I'm going back to my notes. I know that it might be tempting to list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 I's in a row, but that's no good because I can't put more than 3 letters in a row. So I need to incorporate, oh, that's right, our 5. Well, if I have 5 and I need to add 2 more, I know from rule number 3 it says that add means you need to put it after. So I need to add 2 more lines in order for it to be 7. And you can kind of put these lines like on the top and the bottom. That is very common, very common. All right, let's look at our value of 12. So, can't list 12 I's in a row. In 5, well, let's see, I've got my 5, that's 10, and then a 1 and a 1. I don't know if that's a good idea. I mean, kinda, because I know both of those are 5, but is there a Roman numeral that means 10? Yes, there is. It is X. So then we're putting our X, and since we need to add again, we are going to put it on the end. All right, so now we're kind of switching our directions. Now we're going from Roman numerals to numbers. So when I am writing these down, I'm specifically using my notes to track which numbers mean what. So I'm going to zoom in here so we have plenty of room to write. So when I see an X, I'm looking back on my notes. That tells me that's a 10. When I see an L, I know that's a 50. When I see an I know that's a value of 1. And when I see a V, it's a value of 5. All right, so this, wait a second, is not from greatest to least. So that tells me some of these numbers mean something else. This is following rule number 2. So I'm going to group these together. Since 10 is before 50, this is really representing 40, because 50, take away 10, is 40. Same thing with this IV. We know since 1 is less than 5, we need to subtract here. So this value is representing our 4. So this number is 44. All right, let's zoom out and look at the last problem. Oh my gosh, you guys are doing so good. All right, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to label them. So I know the L stands for 50, the V stands for 5, and I know each one of these I's represent 1. Since these numbers are in order from greatest to least, let's write that down, greatest to least, I won't need to remember or follow rule number 2. Rule number 2 says, man, since they're out of order, you have to think about which number comes before and then subtract. These ones are already in order, so I don't need to subtract at all. So basically, I have 50 plus 5 plus 3, and that number is 58. Ding, 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 ding. You guys are awesome. Awesome, awesome. One last challenge before we go. You guys are honor students. I want you to stretch that brain. I want you to work hard. Here we go. All right, challenge time. Here you go. Let's put that brain to work. There are 4 problems, very similar to the ones that we just got done doing. I want you to convert them either into Roman numerals or numbers. And then I'm going to have you pause the video, and we are going to reveal them at the end. So pause that video. Alrighty, keep on pausing the video if you are still not done. If you are ready, let's go ahead and go over the answers. So 30, if you wrote down 3 X's, brilliant work. This still follows rule number 1. We do not have more than 3 letters in a row. Number 15 is a little bit different. Notice that we need to have our value of 10. If I have 10 and I need to get to 15, that tells me I need to add a 5. Since we are adding, the 5 is going to go on the right-hand side of the 10. All right, let's zoom in to look at the last 2. So here we have to, on the bottom, write the numbers. So here we have our X represents 10. Our L represents 50, I represents 1, and X represents 10. Since these are out of order, this is tricky. This tells me we need to follow rule number 2 and do some subtraction. So I'm going to group the 50 and the 10, that's telling me it's going to be 40. I'm going to group the 1 and the 10, that tells me that it's 9. And this answer is 49. I hope you got that one right. Let's look at the last one. Here we have 10 for x. Here we have 10 for x. Looks like they're in order, so I can just add them straight up together, and I'm going to get a value of 20. Well, team, I am super proud of you. I hope you learned something about Roman numerals. When you get to class, we are going to team up with a partner and do some more Roman numeral practice. So be ready to work with a partner and then at the end, work independently. So rewatch the video if you need to. You're going to do amazing. See you later.